The September sun hung low over Billings, Montana, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt parking lot of Riverside Boys' home. Ethan Cole stood at the chain-link gate with everything he owned compressed into two bags, a faded green duffel that had been through 6 different placements, and a black backpack with a broken zipper held shut by duct tape. 21 years old, free, terrified. The word echoed in his head like a taunt. Free. He had counted down to this day since he was 14, marking off calendar squares in the group home, imagining liberation. But now that it had arrived, freedom felt less like wings and more like falling. No safety net, no family waiting, no home to return to because there had never been one to leave. Mrs. Henderson emerged from the administrative building, her sensible shoes clicking against the pavement. She had been his caseworker for the past 3 years, one of the better ones. She did not pity him, which he appreciated, but she also did not pretend that what came next would be easy. In her hands, she carried a manila folder and a white business envelope. The basics are all here: birth certificate, social security card, immunization records. She handed him the folder, then paused before giving him the envelope. There is also this. Your mother left specific instructions that you were to receive it on your 21st birthday. Ethan took the envelope with hands that had grown calloused from maintenance work around the facility. 14 years of changing light bulbs, unclogging drains, fixing broken bed frames. Small skills acquired in fragments, never adding up to anything that felt like competence. The envelope was heavier than he expected. I will be honest with you, Ethan. What comes next is the hardest part. Mrs. Henderson crossed her arms, her expression softening just slightly. You are smart. You keep your head down. You have saved more money than most kids who age out. But this world does not care about any of that. You are going to need to fight for every single thing. I know. Do you? Because I have seen kids like you, good kids, end up homeless within 6 months. Not because they are lazy or stupid, but because one missed paycheck, one medical bill, one bad break, and there is no family to catch them. He wanted to tell her he understood, that he had been preparing for this his entire conscious life, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he nodded, gripping the envelope tighter. There is a job waiting for you at Morrison's auto shop if you want it. Apprentice mechanic? It does not pay much, but Rick Morrison is a decent man. He knows your situation, and I have information about the youth hostel downtown. $70 a week for a bed. Thank you. Mrs. Henderson studied his face for a long moment, and for the first time in 3 years, he saw something that looked like genuine emotion cross her features. Your mother would be proud of what you have become. I never met her, but I read her file. She fought hard to keep you. When she could not anymore, it broke her. The words landed like a punch. Ethan had spent 14 years building walls against exactly this kind of sentiment, against the devastating fact that his mother had loved him and it had not been enough, against the reality that she had died when he was 7 and left him to navigate the system alone. He swallowed hard and looked away. I should go. Mrs. Henderson handed him one last piece of paper. Here is my cell number. If you need anything, anything at all, call me. He took it knowing he never would. Pride, stubbornness, self-reliance. These were the currencies that had kept him alive in the system, and he was not about to abandon them now. The bus stop was 2 blocks away. Ethan shouldered his duffel and started walking, the backpack heavy against his spine. He had $1,768 in a checking account at First Montana Bank, a $1,200 pickup truck waiting in the impound lot that he had bought from an auction and spent 6 months fixing up. A plan to work at the auto shop for a year, save every penny, then maybe enroll in a trade program. Welding or HVAC, something with his hands, something real. He waited under the bus shelter, watching traffic flow past. Billings was the only city he had ever really known, and even after 14 years, he still felt like a visitor. The group home had been on the east side, industrial and forgotten. He had attended 3 different high schools as he moved between placements, never staying long enough to make real friends, always the new kid with the file that preceded him. A truck pulled up to the curb. Not the bus, a Ford F-250, maybe 20 years old, forest green with patches of primer gray where rust had been sanded down. The driver's side window lowered and a man leaned out. Late 60s, weathered face, gray hair cropped military short. He wore a faded flannel shirt and had the kind of forearms that came from decades of actual labor. You Ethan Cole? Ethan's first instinct was wariness. Strangers did not approach foster kids with good intentions. Yeah, who was asking? Name is Frank Donnelly. I was a friend of your mother's. Been looking for you for a long time. The mention of his mother stopped him cold. Ethan studied the man's face, searching for signs of deception, manipulation, the thousand small tells he had learned to read in social workers, counselors, and predators disguised as mentors. But Frank Donnelly's eyes were direct, tired, and carried something that looked like genuine sadness. I do not know you. No, you would not. Last time I saw you, you were 7 years old, day of your mother's funeral. Frank cut the engine and climbed out of the truck. He moved with the stiffness of old injuries poorly healed. I promised Sarah I would find you when you aged out. Took me 3 years to track you down through the system. They do not make it easy. What do you want? Frank reached into his jacket and pulled out a large manila envelope, different from the one Mrs. Henderson had given him, but equally worn. To give you what is yours. Your mother bought something before she died, made arrangements. I have been paying the property taxes for 14 years, waiting for this day. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Property. The word seemed impossible. Kids like him did not own property. They scraped and survived and counted themselves lucky to have a rented room. What kind of property? Land. 240 acres outside Big Timber. About 2.5 hours from here. Frank extended the envelope. The deed is in your name. Has been since you were 7 years old. It is yours, free and clear. The envelope felt like it contained a bomb. Ethan did not take it immediately. This is some kind of scam. No scam. Frank's voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. Your mother was the best woman I ever knew. When she found out she was dying, she did not waste time feeling sorry for herself. She researched, she planned, she fought. She wanted you to have something solid, something that could not be taken away by the system or by bad luck. She wanted you to have a foundation. There had to be a catch. There was always a catch. What is the condition? No condition. It is yours. Frank gestured to the envelope again. But I will be straight with you. The land is raw. There is a foundation that was poured, 40 by 30 feet. Concrete. Your mother did that herself, working nights after her shifts at the hospital. But she ran out of time before she could build on it. There is also a barn, but it is in rough shape. Most of the roof is gone. So you are telling me I own 240 acres of nothing? Frank smiled for the first time, a suing, knowing expression. I am telling you that you own 240 acres of possibility. What you do with it is up to you. Ethan finally took the envelope. Inside were legal documents, a property deed with his name typed in official letters, survey maps, water rights certificates, and at the bottom, a letter in handwriting he barely recognized but somehow felt in his bones. His mother's script, careful and deliberate. I cannot read this here. Frank nodded. There is a motel 6 blocks from here, clean enough. I will buy you a room for the night. You read everything. Think about it. Tomorrow morning, if you want, I will drive you out there so you can see it with your own eyes. Why are you doing this? Because I loved her. Frank said it simply, without drama or expectation. She would not marry me, said she did not want me to become a widower caring for a sick wife. But I loved her anyway. And I promised her that if I could not take care of her, I would make damn sure her son got what she meant for him to have. The motel room smelled like industrial cleaner and old cigarettes that no amount of airing could quite erase. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, the envelope's contents spread across the faded comforter. Legal documents meant nothing to him. The deed, the surveys, the water rights certificates, they were just paper. But the letter was different. He unfolded it slowly, hands trembling in a way that embarrassed him. The handwriting was neat, controlled, the penmanship of someone who had worked in medical records and knew the importance of clarity. But here and there, the letter slanted, wobbled, revealed the shakiness of illness. My dearest Ethan, if you are reading this, you are 21, a man now. I am so sorry I could not be there to see it. He could almost hear her voice, though 14 years had worn the memory thin. A soft voice, patient, always explaining things to him like he was capable of understanding more than his years suggested. This land is not much, just dirt and sky and possibility. I could not afford to build the house before I got too sick. But I left you something more important, the plans. In the lockbox at First Montana Bank, you will find architectural drawings I paid for. soil reports, water rights documents, and $12,000 I saved. It is not enough to hire contractors. It is not enough to buy a finished home, but it is enough for materials if you are careful, if you do the work yourself. Baby, I am not giving you a house. I am giving you the chance to build one with your own hands. Because a man who can build his own home can build his own life. Ethan stopped reading. The room blurred. He pressed the heels of his palms against his eyes, willing himself not to break, not to let 14 years of carefully constructed armor crack. But the tears came anyway, hot and furious and full of a grief he had never fully processed. She had not abandoned him. Even dying, even knowing she would not survive to raise him, she had thought ahead. She had planned. She had given him not money which could be spent or stolen, but opportunity, the chance to prove something to himself. He forced himself to keep reading. I know you are scared. I know you feel alone, but you are not. You come from a line of builders. Your grandfather built bridges during World War II. He was a CB, part of the Naval Construction Battalion. Your great-grandfather homesteaded in Wyoming. They knew how to start with nothing and create something that mattered. That land has good water, good soil. If you work it right, it will take care of you. And when you are my age, when you have your own family, you can tell them, I built this with my bare hands. Do not be afraid of hard work, son. Be afraid of easy money. One builds character, the other destroys it. I love you forever, Mom. He read the letter 3 times before he could fold it and put it away. Then he lay back on the motel bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling, trying to imagine what 240 acres looked like. Trying to imagine himself as someone capable of building a house from a bare foundation. Sleep came in fragments. He dreamed of his mother, young and healthy, mixing concrete in a wheelbarrow. He dreamed of a house that existed only in blueprints. He dreamed of failure, of giving up, of standing before her grave and admitting he was not strong enough. When dawn broke through the thin motel curtains, Ethan was already awake. He showered, dressed in his cleanest jeans and a work shirt, and packed his bags back into their compressed configurations. Frank was waiting in the parking lot, 2 coffees from a gas station sitting on the hood of his truck. You rat it? Ethan nodded. And? I want to see it. The drive took them east out of Billings on Interstate 90, then south on smaller highways that cut through landscapes so vast it made Ethan feel microscopic. Mountains rose in the distance, the Absaroka Range, purple and white capped. The land rolled in great swells of brown and gold, grasslands that stretched to horizons unmarked by human intervention. Frank drove in silence for the first hour, letting Ethan absorb the scale of Montana. This was not the industrial east side of Billings. This was wilderness tamed only at the edges, a place where nature still dictated terms. Your mother researched for 8 months before she bought that land. Frank finally spoke, his voice low and thoughtful. She visited 40 different properties, checked water tables, soil composition, access to roads. She was methodical. When she found this piece, she knew. What made it special? Water rights, good soil, and it was cheap because it had been sitting abandoned for years. The previous owner died. His kids did not want it. It went to estate sale. Your mother got it for $60,000. In this part of Montana, with that much acreage and water, that is almost theft. Ethan watched the landscape blur past. How sick was she when she bought it? Advanced stage 3 cancer. Frank's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. She had maybe 6 months. Everyone told her to spend the time resting. Getting her affairs in order, she told them all to go to hell. She worked doubles, triples, saved every penny. When she had enough for the down payment, she bought it. Then she spent her last 3 months working on that foundation. Mixing concrete, pouring it, leveling it. She did not tell anyone because she knew they would try to stop her. Why did she not ask for help? Pride. Same as you. Frank glanced at him. She wanted to do it herself, to prove she could give you something real, something she built with her own effort. They turned off the highway onto a county road, then onto a gravel track marked by a faded wooden sign. Coal. Population 1. Someone, probably Frank, had put that sign up years ago. It stood crooked now, leaning in the wind. The truck climbed a gentle rise, and then the land opened before them. A valley, wide and shallow, with a creek cutting through the center. Cottonwood trees lined the water, their leaves turning gold with early autumn. Hills rolled away in every direction, covered in sage and wild grass. The sky was so blue it hurt to look at. And there in the middle of it all was the foundation. 30 feet by 40 feet of concrete, gray and weathered but level and solid. Weeds had grown up around the edges. 14 years of Montana weather had stained it, but the structural integrity looked sound. Next to it sat the barn, a skeletal thing with most of its roof collapsed inward. But the frame was still standing, posts thick as telephone poles. Frank parked the truck, and they both climbed out. The wind hit Ethan immediately, constant and clean, carrying the smell of sage and distant pine. No sound except the whisper of grass and the faint rush of the creek. 240 acres. Frank swept his arm across the vista. Creek runs year-round, fed by springs up in those hills. Water rights are solid. Soil is good for pasture, decent for crops if you amend it. You got timber in those groves for firewood or lumber. Ethan walked to the foundation. Up close, he could see the trowel marks in the concrete. The places where someone had worked carefully to smooth and level. His mother had done this, on her knees, dying, for him. He knelt and placed his palm flat against the surface. It was cool, solid, real. Not a dream, not a scam, an actual foundation poured with intention and love, waiting for 14 years. What am I supposed to do with this? Frank came to stand beside him. Build a house. Learn how. I will teach you the basics. I was a CB, same as your grandfather. 30 years in construction battalions. I know foundations, framing, roofing. I am too old to do the heavy work anymore, but I can show you. Ethan looked up at the older man. Why would you do that? Because I promised her. And because you remind me of what I was at your age. Angry, lost, looking for something to prove. I am not angry. Frank smiled slightly. Yes, you are. You are furious. At her for dying, at the system for failing you, at the world for being so goddamn hard. That anger is going to serve you well here. You are going to need it. Ethan stood, brushing dirt from his knees. He turned slowly, taking in the full scope of the property. It was overwhelming, impossible. A fantasy his mother had somehow willed into partial existence. And now it was his responsibility to finish. I do not know the first thing about building a house. Nobody does until they learn. Frank pulled a folded set of papers from his jacket. These are the plans your mother had drawn up. Basic ranch house, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, kitchen, living room. Nothing fancy, but solid. The kind of house that will stand for 100 years if you build it right. Ethan unfolded the architectural drawings. Clean lines, precise measurements, notes in the margins about load-bearing, walls, and roof pitch. It looked professional, expensive. How much did this cost? $3,000. She found an architect who did side work, paid him in installments over 6 months. The weight of it pressed down on Ethan. His mother, dying and broke and desperate, had spent $3,000 on blueprints for a house she would never see, for a son she would have to leave behind. The magnitude of that love, that forward-thinking sacrifice, was almost unbearable. I have $12,000. Frank said it is not enough to hire contractors. It is enough for materials if you are smart. Lumber, windows, roofing, insulation. You will have to scavenge some things. Buy used where you can, but it is doable. How long would it take? Frank looked at the foundation, then at the barn, then back at Ethan. If you worked full-time, with help, you could have it weather-tight before winter. Fully finished, maybe 6 months to a year. I do not have a year. I need a job. I need money. There is ranch work around here. Seasonal stuff. Ben Carver runs cattle on the property adjacent to yours. He is always looking for hands. It will not pay great, but it will keep you fed. Ethan felt the familiar pressure of decisions that mattered, that could not be undone. He could sell this land, take the money and go back to Billings, get his mechanic apprenticeship, live a normal, safe, predictable life, or he could stay, take the risk, try to build something from this concrete foundation and these faded blueprints. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of the creek, and somewhere in the cottonwoods, a hawk cried out. Ethan closed his eyes and tried to imagine his mother standing here, 21 years old herself, pregnant and alone, looking at ultrasound images and wondering what kind of future she could carve out for the child growing inside her. She had fought. When dying, when logical, when everyone told her to rest and accept, she had fought. She had poured concrete. She had bought land. She had planned ahead with a ferocity that transcended her own mortality. He could do no less. I am staying. The words came out steady, certain. I am building this house. Frank studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, then we start tomorrow. First thing we do is assess what we have. Check the foundation for cracks. See what is salvageable from the barn. Make a list of materials. Where do I sleep tonight? Frank gestured to the truck bed. I brought a tent and a sleeping bag. You will camp here until we get 4 walls and a roof. Get used to it. Montana does not care about comfort. That night, Ethan lay in a sleeping bag on ground that would someday be his bedroom, staring up at more stars than he had ever seen in his life. The Milky Way sprawled overhead, a river of light so dense it seemed impossible. No city glow, no ambient noise, just darkness and stars and the distant sound of the creek. He thought about all the beds he had slept in over 14 years. Twin mattresses with plastic covers in group homes. Bunk beds in foster placements that never quite felt safe. Always temporary, always someone else's space, governed by someone else's rules. This ground was his, legally, permanently. For the first time in his conscious memory, he was sleeping on property that bore his name. It was just dirt and grass now, but it was his dirt, his grass, his sky. The magnitude of that ownership, that permanence, settled over him like a blanket. He had spent his entire life as a temporary resident, a placeholder, a case file. And now, impossibly, he had land. Not much, not developed, but real. He pulled out his mother's letter and read it again by flashlight. Her words about building character through hard work, her faith that he could do this, her belief that he came from a line of builders. Ethan had no memory of his grandfather. The man had died before he was born. But lying there under the infinite Montana sky, he felt connected to something larger than himself. A lineage of men who had faced empty land and built something on it, who had not waited for permission or perfect conditions, who had simply started. Tomorrow he would begin. He had no idea what he was doing. He had $12,000 and a foundation and blueprints for a dream. He had Frank Donnelly's rough knowledge and a body that had never done a full day's manual labor. He had 6 months before winter would make construction impossible. It should have felt terrifying, and it did. But underneath the fear was something else, something he had not felt since his mother died. Purpose, direction, a reason to wake up that went beyond mere survival. Ethan folded the letter carefully and tucked it back into his jacket. Then he zipped the sleeping bag to his chin and closed his eyes. The ground was hard, the night was cold, and for the first time in 14 years, he slept without dreaming of being somewhere else. When dawn broke, painting the eastern hills in shades of pink and gold, Frank was already there. He had driven out in darkness, bringing coffee in a thermos and a box of tools. He stood at the foundation's edge, examining it with the critical eye of someone who knew what to look for. Ethan climbed out of the sleeping bag, every muscle announcing its displeasure at a night on hard ground. Frank handed him a cup of coffee without comment. Foundation is solid. Some surface cracking, but nothing structural. Your mother knew what she was doing. Frank knelt, running his hand along the concrete. See these anchor bolts? She set them at exactly 16-inch intervals. That is code. That is professional work. She did this herself, her and me. I helped toward the end when she got too weak to lift the bags. But she mixed most of it, poured most of it, screeded it level. I have seen contractors do worse. Ethan sipped the coffee, feeling the warmth spread through his chest. What do we do first? We measure, we assess, we plan. Frank pulled a tape measure from his belt. Construction is 90% planning, 10% execution. You rush, you fail. You measure twice and cut once, you succeed. They spent the morning mapping the foundation, checking measurements against the blueprints, identifying where walls would stand and where doors would open. Frank taught as they worked, explaining load-bearing principles, showing Ethan how to read the plans, testing him with questions. How thick do these walls need to be? 6 inches? Why? Because they are load-bearing. They are supporting the roof structure. Where does the bathroom go? Southwest corner. Why there? Because that is closest to where we will dig the septic system. Shorter pipe runs mean less money and fewer potential problems. By noon, Ethan's head was swimming with information. Joist spacing, ridge beam calculations, R values for insulation. It was like learning a new language, and Frank was an unforgiving teacher. When Ethan got something wrong, Frank made him stop and figure out why. You cannot just memorize this. You have to understand it. When you are up on that roof by yourself, I am not going to be there to tell you the right answer. You need to know it in your bones. They broke for lunch, eating sandwiches Frank had packed while sitting on the tailgate of his truck. The valley stretched out before them, vast and indifferent. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, riding thermals. What happens if I fail? Ethan asked the question that had been gnawing at him since yesterday. What if I cannot do this? Then you fail. Frank bit into his sandwich, chewed thoughtfully. But I do not think you will. How do you know? Because you are here. You could have sold this land site unseen, could have taken the money and gone back to the city. But you came. You slept on the ground. You are asking questions. That tells me everything I need to know. Ethan wanted to believe him. But doubt was a constant companion, whispering that he was out of his depth, that this was a fantasy, that he would be broken by the first real challenge. As if reading his mind, Frank set down his sandwich and turned to face him directly. Let me tell you something about construction. Every single house that has ever been built started exactly like this, with empty land and a plan and someone who did not know if they could do it. The only difference between a builder and someone who dreams about building is that the builder starts, and then they do not stop. What if the money runs out? Then you work, save, build in stages. This is not a race. What if winter comes before I am done? Then you winterize what you have and finish in spring. Houses do not care about your timeline. The afternoon brought their first real work. They salvaged lumber from the collapsed barn, pulling nails, stacking boards that were still straight enough to use. It was hard, repetitive, unglamorous labor. Ethan's hands blistered within the first hour. By hour 3, the blisters had popped and reformed. By evening, his palms were raw meat. Frank noticed, but said nothing. He simply worked alongside, demonstrating the most efficient way to pull nails without damaging wood, how to spot rot, how to stack lumber so it would not warp. When the sun touched the western hills, Frank called it. That is enough for today. We got maybe 300 board feet of usable lumber. That is $300 you did not have to spend. Ethan looked at his ruined hands. Worth it? Ask me again when you are nailing up wall studs with wood you pulled yourself. You will know the answer then. Frank left as darkness fell, promising to return in 2 days with more tools and a friend who might be willing to help. Ethan sat by a small fire he had built from scrap wood, holding his hands as close to the flames as he could stand, trying to warm away the ache. This was day 2. He had 6 months to make this foundation into a shelter. The math was brutal, but his mother had done impossible things while dying. He was young, healthy, and desperate. That had to count for something. He pulled out his phone, checked his bank balance, $1,768 in savings, $12,000 in the trust account Frank managed. Materials would cost $8,000 to $10,000 if they were careful. That left almost nothing for error, for accidents, for the inevitable moments when plans met reality and reality won. Ethan added another piece of wood to the fire and watched sparks spiral up into the darkness. Somewhere out there in towns and cities across Montana, people were sitting in finished homes they had bought with mortgages. They had walls and roofs and central heating. They had never mixed concrete or pulled nails from salvaged lumber. But they had also never built something from nothing. They had never placed their hands on a foundation poured by someone who loved them and felt the weight of that love made manifest in concrete and rebar. This was going to hurt. It was going to test him in ways he could not yet imagine. There would be failures, mistakes, moments when he wanted to quit, but he would not. Because somewhere in whatever came after death, his mother was watching, and he would be damned if he let her down. Ethan Cole was 21 years old. He had 240 acres, a foundation, $12,000, and the blueprints for a house he had no idea how to build. It was barely enough, but barely was a start, and starting was everything. The fire burned low. The stars wheeled overhead, and on the cold Montana ground, on land that was his, Ethan slept the sleep of someone who had finally found something worth the fight. The third morning arrived with frost coating the foundation like sugar on concrete. Ethan woke to the sound of his own teeth chattering, his breath visible inside the tent. September in Montana played cruel tricks, summer heat during the day surrendering to near freezing before dawn. He had slept in his clothes, jeans, and a hoodie, and still the cold had worked its way into his bones. He crawled out of the sleeping bag and immediately regretted it. Every muscle screamed protest. His shoulders burned from yesterday's labor pulling nails and stacking lumber. His hands were worse, the blisters now angry red welts that split open when he made fists. This was day 3 and his body was already negotiating surrender. But Frank's truck was rumbling up the gravel track, headlights cutting through the pre-dawn gray, and there was no time for weakness. Ethan splashed cold water from a jug on his face, pulled on work boots that were still new enough to hurt, and met the older man at the foundation's edge. Frank climbed out, carrying 2 thermoses and a paper bag that smelled like bacon. He took one look at Ethan's hands and grunted. "Let me see them." Ethan held them out, palms up. The blisters had merged into larger wounds, some weeping clear fluid. Frank pulled a first aid kit from behind the truck seat, doused the wounds with hydrogen peroxide that made Ethan suck air through his teeth, then wrapped each palm in gauze and medical tape. This will happen again. Calluses form under blisters. Blisters heal and tear and heal. Give it 2 weeks, your hands will be leather. Until then, you work through it or you quit. Your choice. I am not quitting. Good, because today we start framing and I need you functional. They ate breakfast, standing up, bacon and egg sandwiches Frank's wife had made at 4 in the morning. The man had driven 90 minutes in darkness to be here at first light, and he had done it without complaint, without expectation of thanks. It was simply what needed doing. "You married?" Ethan asked, realizing how little he knew about the man teaching him to build. "Was." Frank sipped his coffee, eyes on the eastern horizon where the sun was beginning to paint the hills gold. 42 years. She passed 3 years ago. Cancer, same as your mother. "I am sorry." "Me too." Frank crumpled his sandwich wrapper and tossed it in the truck bed. "She met your mother at the hospital. They were in treatment together. That is how I knew Sarah, how we became friends." The revelation settled into place. Frank had not just lost Ethan's mother, he had lost his own wife too. Both to the same disease, both leaving him behind to honor promises made to dying women. The weight of that loyalty, that steadfast commitment to the dead, was humbling. A second truck appeared on the access road, kicking up dust in the morning light. This one was newer, a white Dodge with ranch logos on the door. It parked next to Frank's vehicle, and a man climbed out who looked like he had been carved from the Montana landscape itself. Late 50s, maybe 6'4", shoulders like a linebacker gone to seed but still formidable. He wore Wranglers and a canvas jacket and a Stetson that had seen better decades. "This is Ben Carver." Frank made the introduction with a gesture. "Owns the ranch adjacent to yours. Ben, this is Ethan Cole, Sarah's boy." Ben approached with the measured caution of a man evaluating livestock. He did not offer his hand immediately, just studied Ethan with blue eyes that missed nothing. The wrapped hands, the cheap work boots, the tent behind the foundation. He took it all in and made his calculations. "Frank says you are planning to build a house." "That is the plan. You ever built anything before?" "No, sir." Ben almost smiled. "At least you are honest. Most kids your age would lie, pretend they know things they do not." He finally extended his hand. "Ben Carver, I run cattle on 3,000 acres surrounding this property. Your mother bought water rights from me for $1. Told her if her son ever showed up, I would give him a fair shake. So here is the shake." They shook. Ben's grip was iron-wrapped in sandpaper, the hand of a man who had worked every day of his life. He held on a moment longer than necessary, testing, then released. "Frank says you might have work." Ethan kept his voice level, not begging but not proud either. "Just stating facts. I need money for materials. I can work." "Can you ride?" "A horse?" Ben's expression suggested this was possibly the dumbest question he had heard all year. "No, a unicorn. Yes, a horse. I've never been on a horse." "Can you fix fence?" "I can learn." "Can you show up on time and do what you are told without bitching about it?" "Yes, sir." Ben looked at Frank, some unspoken communication passing between them, then back at Ethan. 6 in the morning, Monday through Friday. $15 an hour, 4 hours a day. That is $300 a week. Work is hard. I do not tolerate laziness or excuses. You prove you can handle it. Maybe I give you more hours. You screw up or quit. Do not come back. Deal?" "Deal." Ben nodded once, sharp and final. "Start Monday. Wear boots with a heel, not those sneakers disguised as work boots. And get gloves. Your hands are already hamburger." After Ben left, Frank walked Ethan to the barn. They had salvaged what they could from the collapsed structure, but now it was time to assess what remained standing. The main posts were solid, old-growth timber, 12 inches square. The frame was sound, even where the roof had failed. With work, it could be saved. This barn is older than the foundation. Frank ran his hand along one of the posts, feeling for rot. Probably built in the 30s or 40s. See this joinery? He pointed to where beams met posts, fitted together with mortise and tenon joints, wooden pegs instead of nails. This is old-school craftsmanship. They do not build like this anymore. Can we use it? We can rebuild it. New roof, new siding. But the bones are good, better than good. This timber will outlast anything we put up new. They spent the morning pulling debris from inside the barn, salvaging boards, sorting what could be reused from what needed to be burned. It was mindless labor that gave Ethan time to think, to process what he had committed to. 4 hours a day for Ben Carver would bring in $1,200 a month, enough to eat, to buy materials in small quantities, to keep moving forward. But it also meant his days would start at 5 in the morning and end after dark. Ranch work until 10, then construction until the sun set. No days off, no margin for error or injury, or the simple human need to rest. For the next 6 months, possibly longer, his life would be reduced to labor and sleep in the slow, grinding progress of turning a foundation into a house. Around noon, another vehicle arrived. This one was a pickup truck that had seen better decades, primer gray and rust red, held together by determination and duct tape. The driver was older than Frank, maybe 70, with a white beard and arms covered in faded tattoos. Military ink, the kind that marked a generation. Frank waved him over. "Ethan, this is Thomas Morrison. Everyone calls him Bear. He was a Marine back when Marines still did their own construction. He knows more about framing than any man I ever met." Bear shook Ethan's hand with surprising gentleness, mindful of the bandages. "Frank tells me you need to learn how to build." "Yes, sir." Bear looked at the foundation, walked its perimeter, knelt to check the level, stood and surveyed the landscape. Then he turned to Ethan with an expression that contained no sympathy whatsoever. "I will teach you, but I do not carry lumber for kids. You want to learn framing, you carry every board. You want to learn roofing, you haul every shingle. I do not do the work. I tell you how. You do it. Understand?" "Understood." "Good. We start with the sill plate. That is the first piece of wood that touches the foundation. Get it wrong and everything else is crooked forever. Get it right and the house practically builds itself." The three of them worked through the afternoon, Frank and Bear teaching, Ethan doing. They showed him how to drill into concrete, how to set anchor bolts, how to measure diagonals to ensure the foundation was truly square. Bear was relentless, making Ethan redo measurements 3 times until he could prove the corners were exactly 90 degrees. Close enough is not good enough. Bear said it like scripture. In carpentry, close enough means failure, means doors that do not close right, windows that leak, floors that slope. You measure until you are sure, then you measure again. By the time the sun touched the western hills, Ethan's brain was as exhausted as his body. He had learned about pressure-treated lumber and sill sealer and code requirements for bolting. He had drilled until his arms shook and measured until the numbers blurred together. And they had only completed 20 feet of sill plate. The foundation was 90 feet in perimeter. At this rate, it would take a week just to finish the first step. Bear and Frank packed their tools as darkness gathered. Bear paused before climbing into his truck. "You did good today. Listened. Asked smart questions. Did not pretend to know things you do not. That is rare. Most young guys, their ego gets in the way of learning. You keep that attitude, you might actually pull this off." After they left, Ethan sat on the foundation in the gathering dark, too tired to even set up dinner. His hands throbbed despite the bandages. His back felt like it had been beaten with pipes. And this was only day 3. Only the sill plate. He had not even started on walls yet, on the real work of framing. The enormity of the task pressed down on him like a physical weight. 6 months to weather tight. Walls and roof and windows and doors, plumbing and electrical. 1,000 things he did not know how to do, each one critical, each one a potential point of failure. He thought about his mother's letter, the one he had read dozens of times already, until he could recite parts from memory. "Do not be afraid of hard work. Be afraid of easy money. One builds character, the other destroys it." She had known. Somehow she had known that this would be the hardest thing he had ever attempted. that there would be moments when quitting seemed not just reasonable, but necessary. And she had tried to give him something to hold on to. Not encouragement, not false promises, just the simple truth that hard things were worth doing. Ethan stood, brushing dirt from his jeans. He looked out across the valley. Lights were beginning to appear in distant ranch houses. People settling in for the evening, for dinner and television, in the comfortable rhythms of established lives. He had none of that, but he had this. 240 acres and a foundation in the slowly dawning realization that he was not just building a house. He was building himself. Monday morning came too early. Ethan woke in darkness, dressed by the light of a headlamp, and drove his beat-up truck 15 miles to the Carver Ranch. He arrived at 5:50, not wanting to be late for his first day, and found Ben already in the barn saddling horses. "You are early. Good." Ben gestured to a chestnut mare. "This is Rosie. She is old and patient and will not kill you." "Probably. Grab that saddle." Ethan had never saddled a horse. Ben watched him struggle for 30 seconds, then sighed and demonstrated. "Blanket first. Saddle on top. Cinch tight but not strangling. Check the bit, make sure it sits right." The mare stood perfectly still, long accustomed to incompetent riders. They rode out into rangeland still dark, following fence lines by the light of headlamps mounted on their hats. Ben did not speak except to give directions. "Check that post. Tighten that wire. Dig out that erosion." The work was simple but endless, miles of fence needing constant maintenance. Ethan learned quickly that ranching was less about cowboys and more about maintenance. Fence posts rotted, wire sagged, gates broke, cattle pushed against barriers testing for weakness. The work never ended because the land and animals never stopped trying to reclaim their wildness. By 10 in the morning, Ethan's thighs were screaming from 4 hours in the saddle. He had never used these muscles, had not known they existed. When he finally climbed off Rosie, his legs nearly buckled. Ben watched without comment, already moving on to the next task. "You did not complain." Ben said it while measuring oats for the horses. "Most city kids, they bitch about being sore, about being cold, about the work being boring. You kept your mouth shut and did what you were told. That is worth something." "Thank you. Do not thank me yet. This was the easy day. Tomorrow we sort cattle." Ethan drove back to his property with $60 earned and a new understanding of exhaustion. But there was no time to rest. Frank and Bear would arrive in an hour, and the sill plate needed finishing. He changed into dry clothes, forced down a protein bar and instant coffee, and was measuring lumber when their trucks appeared. The week fell into a punishing rhythm. Up at 5, ranch work until 10, construction until dark. Eat, sleep, repeat. His body existed in a constant state of complaint, muscles adapting and tearing and rebuilding themselves overnight. The blisters on his hands broke and bled and slowly transformed into calluses. His face, already tanned from outdoor work at the group home, darkened to deep brown. By Friday, they had completed the sill plate around the entire foundation and begun framing the floor joists. This was real progress, visible and measurable. Ethan stood on the foundation at sunset looking at the geometric pattern of 2 by 10 boards laid out in parallel, 16 inches on center, exactly as the blueprint specified. It was beginning to look like something. Not a house yet, but the skeleton of one. Frank came to stand beside him, both of them surveying the week's work. "You have natural hands for this. Not everyone does. Some people, they can read the plans but cannot translate it to physical work. You can. I am just doing what you tell me. No, you are understanding why we do it. That is different." Bear noticed it too. The way you check things twice without being told. The way you anticipate the next step. Ethan did not know what to say. Praise was unfamiliar territory, especially praise about competence, about being good at something that mattered. He had spent his childhood being told he was smart, which felt empty, genetic luck rather than earned achievement. But this was different. This was acknowledgement that he could do something difficult, something physical and real. "Monday we start the walls." Frank clapped him on the shoulder. "That is when it gets real, when you can start to see the house taking shape." That weekend, Ethan's first since starting, he worked alone. He needed the solitude to process everything, to let his body rest while his mind worked through what he had learned. He spent Saturday cleaning up the job site, organizing lumber, creating systems for tools and materials. Small efficiencies that would save time later. Sunday, he explored the property for the first time beyond the immediate area of construction. He followed the creek upstream, found where it emerged from a spring in the hillside, clear and cold and constant. He walked the fence lines, or what remained of them, noting where posts had rotted and wire had rusted through. He climbed to the highest point on his acreage and looked out over land that was his in a way nothing had ever been his before. From up here, he could see Ben Carver's ranch house in the distance, a sprawling structure that spoke of generations and stability. He could see the highway far to the north, a thin line connecting this wilderness to civilization. And he could see his foundation, small and alone in the valley, waiting. The view gave him perspective. This was not just about building shelter. This was about claiming a place in a landscape that did not care whether he succeeded or failed. Montana would be here long after he was gone. The question was whether he would leave a mark on it or surrender to it. 3 weeks into the build, as September gave way to October, they began raising walls. Framing walls required a different kind of precision than floor joists. Bear showed him how to lay out the studs, mark them for windows and doors, nail the top and bottom plates. They built the first wall flat on the deck they had created. Then Bear taught him the most important lesson of all. A wall lying flat is just wood. A wall standing up is a commitment. Once we raise this, we are declaring that the house will stand here, exactly like this, forever. So before we lift, we check everything. Measurements, plumb, level, square. We do not get a second chance to place the walls. They checked. Ethan measured the diagonals, confirmed they were equal. Bear used a level longer than he was tall. Frank checked against the blueprints. When all 3 men agreed, they lifted. The wall was heavy, awkward, wanting to twist, but together they wrestled it vertical, walked it into position, braced it temporarily with 2x4s nailed at angles. And suddenly, impossibly, there was a wall, 8 feet tall, spanning 20 feet, standing where there had only been empty air. Ethan stepped back and felt something shift in his chest. This was real. This was happening. The foundation was no longer just a slab of concrete. It was becoming a room. They built 3 more walls that day, the work becoming slightly easier as Ethan learned the rhythm. Lift together, walk it up, brace it, check, plumb, and alignment. By evening, the 4 exterior walls of what would be the main living space stood skeletal against the darkening sky. Frank and Bear left as the sun set, but Ethan stayed. He walked inside the walls, even though there was no roof yet, no floor beyond the joists, no protection from the elements. But there was definition. There was inside and outside. There was the beginning of shelter. He stood in what the blueprints labeled as the kitchen and tried to imagine his mother standing here. Tried to picture her looking at these same plans, envisioning him someday cooking dinner in this space. She had died before he was old enough to help with cooking, before he could learn her recipes or her techniques. But maybe this kitchen would hold some echo of her, some sense memory encoded in the concrete she had poured and the plans she had paid for. The next weeks blurred together in a cascade of incremental progress. Wall after wall rose from the foundation. Interior walls subdividing space into rooms, window and door frames creating holes that would someday hold glass and passage. Ethan worked until his body moved on autopilot, his hands knowing what to do before his mind consciously decided. Ben Carver noticed the changes too, though he said nothing directly. But the ranch work shifted. Ben gave Ethan more responsibility, harder tasks, fixing equipment, running cattle through chutes for health checks, work that required judgment, not just endurance. One morning in late October, after they had finished sorting calves, Ben pulled 2 beers from a cooler in his truck. It was barely 9 in the morning, but Ben offered one anyway. In ranch country, time was more suggestion than rule. "You are not quitting." "No, sir." "Frank said you would not. I bet him $20 you would be gone by October." Ben took a long drink. "I owe him $20. What made you think I would quit?" Most people do. They have some romantic idea about land and building and self-sufficiency. Then they realize it is just hard work that never ends. They realize nobody is going to congratulate them or make it easier. So they quit. "I do not have anywhere to quit to." Ben studied him over the rim of his beer. "That is part of it, but not all. You could sell that land tomorrow, take the money, live somewhere easier, but you are not going to." "No." "Why not?" Ethan thought about the question, tried to find words for something he barely understood himself. "Because she bought it for me." while she was dying. She spent her last strength on it. If I quit, I am saying that did not matter. That she did not matter. Ben nodded slowly. That is a good reason. The best reason, your mother understood something most people never learn. Property is not just ownership, it is responsibility, a promise to the land and to the future. Did you know her well? Number. Met her once. She came to negotiate water rights. I was a bastard about it. Told her city people do not last out here. She looked me dead in the eye and said she was not doing it for herself. She was doing it for her son, and she would be dead before he claimed it. Ben paused, something like regret crossing his face. That shut me up real quick. I sold her the easement for $1 and told her if her son ever showed up, I would give him a fair shake. Thank you for that. Do not thank me. You are earning it every morning you show up on time and do the work. That is how respect works out here. Nobody gives it to you. You earn it by doing what you say you will do. By early November, they had framed all the walls and installed the window and door openings. Now came the critical work of roofing. They had to finish it before the first snow or risk having the interior framing ruined by moisture. Bear supervised the roof framing with even more intensity than usual. This is where houses fail. Bad roof equals dead house. We do this right or we do not do it at all. They installed the ridge beam first, the central spine of the roof structure. Then rafters, each one carefully measured and cut to match the roof pitch specified in the blueprints. It was terrifying work. Ethan found himself 20 feet in the air, balancing on joists, nailing rafters overhead, while the Montana wind tried to knock him off his perch. Bear watched from below, shouting corrections. Check your spacing. That rafter is off by half an inch. Measure again. Ethan wanted to shout back that half an inch did not matter, but he had learned that with Bear, everything mattered. He climbed down, measured again, and Bear was right, half an inch off. He cut a new rafter. By mid-November, they had the rafters installed and began sheathing the roof with plywood. This was when Ethan truly understood why Bear had been so obsessive about measurements. The plywood sheets were 8 feet by 4 feet, perfect rectangles. If the framing was true, they fit perfectly with minimal cutting. If the framing was off even slightly, every sheet had to be custom cut, wasting time and material. Their framing was true. The sheets fit like puzzle pieces. Bear almost smiled. See? Measure right, work easy, rush the beginning, suffer forever. They finished the roof sheathing on a Friday in late November, just as the first serious cold front moved in. Ethan stood on the ridge beam looking out over the valley and realized he could see his breath but did not care. Below him was a structure with 4 walls and a roof. Not finished, not even close, but no longer just a foundation. This was a building. Frank climbed up to join him, both men balancing on the narrow beam, though the effort cost Frank more than he wanted to show. Ethan noticed the older man was breathing harder than usual, that his face had a grayish tinge. You all right? Just the cold, Frank waved it off. Next week we put on the tar paper and shingles. After that we are weather tight. You can move inside. Inside. The word carried weight Ethan had never appreciated before. Inside meant protection. Inside meant a defined space separate from the wilderness. Inside meant home. They worked through the last week of November, through the first light snow that dusted the roof and melted by afternoon. The shingles went on in courses, overlapping, creating a waterproof barrier. It was repetitive work, hard on the knees and back, but it was also deeply satisfying. Each row of shingles was visible progress, the house slowly armoring itself against the elements. Ben Carver drove up one afternoon to check their progress. He stood looking at the house for a long time without speaking. Finally, he turned to Ethan. You are going to make it. I did not think you would, but you are. Still a long way to go. Yes, but you have what matters. Walls and roof before winter. The rest you can do in stages. That evening, after Frank and Bear left, Ethan walked through the house for the first time thinking of it as actual shelter. The walls were still just studs, no insulation or drywall. The windows were covered in plastic sheeting. The floor was plywood subfloor. But there was a roof overhead. There was definition and structure, and the bones of what would become livable space. He stood in the room designated as the bedroom and made a decision. Tonight he would sleep inside. Not in comfort. He had no heat source yet, no real protection from the cold beyond the roof. But he would sleep inside walls he had built with his own hands. That night, December 1st, exactly 3 months after arriving, Ethan Cole slept for the first time under a roof that was his. The temperature dropped to 15 degrees. His breath crystallized in the air, but he was inside, and that made all the difference. The work continued into December, though Frank's visits became less frequent. He was honest about it when he called. My lungs are not handling the cold well. I will be down in Arizona by Christmas, but Bear can handle the rest. You know enough now to work on your own. Will you be back in spring? There was a pause on the line, longer than comfortable. Planned to be. We will see what the doctors say. Ethan wanted to argue, to insist that Frank take better care of himself, but he understood that some men would rather work until they dropped than sit idle and comfortable. Frank was one of those men. Bear came by more regularly now, checking Ethan's work, teaching him insulation and basic electrical. The old Marine was gruff as ever, but Ethan noticed he brought food sometimes, materials that Ethan had not asked for, help that was never acknowledged as such. "You're doing good," Bear said it one evening as they wrapped up for the day. Most kids would have quit by now. Cold, isolation, hard work. But you are still here. Where else would I go? Anywhere easier. But you chose hard. That says something about your character. By mid-December, Ethan had a functioning space. One room with insulation stuffed between the studs. Plastic sheeting over the windows for now. Real glass would come later. A wood stove purchased used from a rancher downsizing, ancient but functional, that turned the space into something approaching warm. It was not finished. The bathroom was stubbed in but not usable yet. The kitchen was just an open space with plumbing capped. But it was shelter, real shelter, and as the Montana winter deepened around him, that was enough. He thought about his mother often during those December nights, alone in the house she had dreamed. About the faith it must have taken to buy this land while dying, to pour this foundation knowing she would never see what rose from it, to plan and save and sacrifice for a future she would not witness. That faith had carried him through 3 months of the hardest work he had ever done, through blisters and exhaustion and moments of doubt so profound he had almost walked away. Her belief that he could do this, encoded in concrete and legal documents and a letter written while cancer consumed her, had been stronger than his fear. And now, standing in a room he had built with guidance from men who had chosen to care, Ethan understood what she had really given him. Not land, not shelter, but the chance to discover that he was capable of more than he had believed. That hard work could transform not just materials, but the person doing the work. He was not the same scared 21-year-old who had stepped off that bus 3 months ago. His body had changed, yet grown lean and hard from constant labor. But more than that, his understanding of himself had shifted. He knew now what his hands could build, what his will could endure, what his mother's love had made possible. Winter deepened. Snow piled against the north wall. The wood stove burned day and night. And inside the house that should not exist, built by someone who should have failed, Ethan Cole survived his first Montana winter. Not just survived, grew stronger, learned more, became someone who could look at raw land and see not obstacles but possibility. That was what his mother had known. That was what Frank had taught. That was what these 3 months had proven. He was a builder now, and builders did not quit when things got hard. They measured twice, cut once, and kept working until the job was done. Winter arrived in earnest the second week of December, not with gentle snowfall, but with a blizzard that buried the valley under 2 feet of snow in 36 hours. Ethan woke to a silence so complete it felt like the world had stopped breathing. No wind, no animal sounds, just the absolute quiet that comes when fresh snow muffles everything. He had spent the previous evening preparing, filling every container he owned with water, stacking firewood inside the house, checking that the wood stove had adequate fuel. The blizzard had been forecast, but forecasts in Montana were suggestions, not guarantees. You prepared for the worst and hoped for something milder. The house held. Snow piled against the north wall, creating a drift that reached the windowsills. But inside, with the wood stove burning steady, the temperature remained tolerable, not comfortable. Ethan could see his breath in the corners far from the stove, but survivable. The roof he had built did not leak. The walls blocked the wind. The windows, despite being basic double-pane units from the salvage yard, kept the worst of the cold at bay. He spent 3 days snowed in, unable to reach his truck, unable to work at the Carver Ranch. 3 days alone with his thoughts and the constant feeding of the wood stove. He read construction manuals by lamplight. He sketched plans for the interior finishing work. He ate canned soup and crackers and rationed his supplies like a man under siege. On the fourth day, the sun emerged. The sky turned a blue so intense it hurt to look at directly, and the snow began the slow process of melting and sublimating. Ethan dug out his truck using a shovel Bear had left, cleared a path to the road, and drove to the Carver Ranch to check in. Ben was in the barn when Ethan arrived, repairing tack. He looked up, but did not seem surprised. Figured you were snowed in. You did not call asking for help, so I assumed you were handling it. I handled it. Household up? Yes, sir. Roof did not leak. Stayed warm enough. Ben nodded, returning his attention to the leather he was stitching. That is a good test. Winter tells you if your building is sound. Sounds like yours is. The compliment, delivered in Ben Carver's typically understated way, meant more than elaborate praise would have. Ethan had passed a test he had not known he was taking. The house had been evaluated by Montana Winter and found adequate. Work at the ranch shifted with the season. Cattle needed hay delivered daily. Water sources had to be kept from freezing. Equipment broke down in the cold and needed constant repair. Ethan learned winter ranching was a war of attrition against the elements, a daily commitment to keeping animals alive until spring. But he also learned that winter created a different kind of community. Ranchers helped each other more in winter, understanding that isolation could turn deadly. When Ben's tractor broke down, 3 neighboring ranchers showed up within hours with parts and tools and the collective knowledge to fix it. When the Hendersons lost power for a week, the community organized a rotation to check on them, bring food, make sure they had heat. Ethan found himself included in this network almost without noticing. He was no longer the city kid trying to build a house. He was the coal place, a neighbor, someone who showed up when needed and could be counted on to handle his own problems without complaint. One Sunday in mid-December, Ben invited him to the ranch house for dinner. It was the first time Ethan had been inside, and the difference between Ben's established home and his own bare-bones structure was humbling. The Carver house had been built over generations, additions and improvements layered on top of the original homestead structure. It was warm, comfortable, lived in. The kind of place that spoke of continuity and family. Ben's wife Rita met him at the door. She was a small woman, maybe 5'3", but she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who ran a complex operation. The ranch might be Ben's domain, but the house was clearly hers. So you are Sarah's boy. Rita studied him with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She looked like you. Same jaw. Same way of standing, like you are bracing against a wind. You knew my mother? Met her once. She came to talk to Ben about water rights. I made her stay for dinner. We talked for 3 hours. She told me about you, about being sick, about the plans she was making. Ethan did not know what to say. Every mention of his mother, from people who had known her, felt like receiving a piece of a puzzle he had been trying to complete for 14 years. She was terrified. Rita said it gently but directly. Not of dying. She had made her peace with that. She was terrified that you would think she abandoned you, that you would grow up believing she did not love you enough to stay. The words hit like a physical blow. Ethan had to look away, focus on a painting on the wall, anything to avoid the emotion threatening to surface. I told her that love is not measured in years, Rita continued, moving to the kitchen where something was cooking that smelled like heaven. It is measured in what you leave behind. And she was leaving you something permanent, something that would tell you every day that you mattered to her. Dinner was pot roast with vegetables that had been grown in Rita's garden and canned for winter. Homemade bread, apple pie from their own trees. It was the best meal Ethan had eaten since leaving the group home. Maybe the best meal he had ever eaten. But more than the food, it was the atmosphere, the easy conversation, the sense of family. Also at the table was their daughter, Julia. She was 26, home for the weekend from her veterinary practice in Bozeman. Tall, practical looking, with her mother's sharp eyes and her father's direct manner. She had grown up on this ranch, left for college and vet school, then returned to Montana because, as she explained, the mountains had never let go of her. You are building a house by yourself? She asked it like she was trying to understand a foreign concept. With help. Frank Donnelly and Bear Morrison taught me. But yes, mostly by myself. That is impressive. Most people hire contractors. I could not afford contractors. Julia smiled. Honest. I like that. Most guys would make up some story about wanting the experience or connecting with the land. You just admit you are broke. I am very broke. But you are building anyway. That takes guts or stupidity. Maybe both. Definitely both. The conversation flowed easily, naturally. Julia asked intelligent questions about the construction, showing genuine interest in the technical challenges. She told stories about her work, the animals she treated, the ranchers who sometimes valued their livestock more than their own health. After dinner, she offered to drive him back to his property, claiming she wanted to see the house. Ben and Rita exchanged a look that Ethan could not quite interpret, but felt significant. The drive took 15 minutes through landscape transformed by snow into something alien and beautiful. Julia drove with easy competence, the truck responding to her touch like a familiar tool. When they arrived, she walked through the house with a critical eye, not judging but assessing. She tested the stability of the walls, checked the window installations, ran her hand along the wood stove chimney, checking for heat consistency. "This is solid work," she said it standing in what would eventually be the living room. "For someone who had never built before, you did not screw it up." High praise. I mean it. My dad has seen a lot of construction projects fail. He did not think you would make it past October, but you proved him wrong. He told me he bet Frank $20 I would quit. He did, and he paid up last week. Julia leaned against the window frame, looking out at the snow-covered valley. My dad does not give respect easily, but when he does, it is earned. You earned it. They talked until the light faded, conversation ranging from construction to ranching to the challenges of rural life. Julia was easy to talk to, not requiring performance or pretense. She had grown up in this landscape and understood its demands. Before she left, she turned at the door. "I'm going to be honest with you. My dad asked me to come check on you. Make sure you are not some scammer or idiot who would abandon the property and leave it to rot." The admission was so direct it took Ethan a moment to process. "And what is your assessment?" "You are neither a scammer nor an idiot. You are just a kid trying to honor his mother's memory the best way you know how." She paused and something shifted in her expression. "And for what it is worth, I told him that 3 weeks ago. I have been coming back to check on you because I wanted to, not because he asked." The distinction mattered. Ethan felt something warm bloom in his chest, something that might have been hope or possibility or the beginning of connection. After she drove away, Ethan stood in the doorway watching her taillights disappear into the winter dark. Something had shifted in that conversation. Some barrier had come down. He felt less alone than he had in months. January brought temperatures that regularly dropped below zero, and days so short that darkness ruled more hours than light. Ethan worked on interior projects that did not require natural illumination. He installed insulation in the bedroom, learning to cut and fit the fiberglass batting until it filled every cavity between studs. He began the slow process of hanging drywall, sheets of gypsum board that transformed raw framing into something that resembled walls. The work was different from framing, more finicky, more about patience and precision than brute force. He learned to mud and tape joints, applying thin layers of compound and sanding them smooth. It was repetitive, meditative work that gave him time to think. Julia visited more frequently now, usually on weekend afternoons. She would bring food Rita had sent, always with the excuse that her mother had made too much and it would go to waste otherwise. But Ethan suspected the meals were deliberate, Rita's way of making sure he ate properly through the winter. Sometimes Julia helped with projects, holding drywall sheets while Ethan screwed them into place, or helping him measure for the bathroom fixtures he was planning to install. Sometimes they just talked, sitting by the wood stove while snow fell outside, conversations that ranged from serious to silly and back again. One Saturday in late January, she arrived to find Ethan frustrated, staring at a section of drywall he had hung crooked. He had already removed it twice and was about to try a third time. "What is wrong?" she asked, setting down a container of what smelled like beef stew. "This," he gestured at the wall. "I cannot get it level. Every time I think I have it right, I step back and it is off." Julia examined the wall, then the studs behind it. "Your studs are not plumb, see? This one bows out about a 1/4 inch. You are trying to hang a flat sheet on a curved surface. Can I fix it?" You could shim the stud, build it out to match. Or you could accept that old houses have character and perfect is the enemy of done. Ethan wanted perfect, had been chasing it for months, trying to build something that would have made Bear Morrison proud. But Julia's practical wisdom was hard to argue with. "How do you know about construction?" "I grew up on a ranch. We fix everything ourselves. You learn or you pay someone, and we could not afford to pay. She pulled off her coat. Show me where you are trying to hang the sheet. They worked together for the next 2 hours, Julia's presence making the frustrating work easier. She had good instincts, could see solutions he missed. When they finally got the sheet hung acceptably, they stood back admiring their work. Not perfect, Julia said, but good enough. And good enough finished is better than perfect never done. That sounds like something Ben would say. It is. He says it about once a week. They ate the beef stew sitting on the plywood floor, backs against the one-finished wall, the wood stove crackling nearby. It was comfortable in a way Ethan had not experienced since before his mother died. Easy companionship, no pressure, just two people sharing space and food and conversation. Can I ask you something? Julia said, setting down her empty bowl. Why did you really stay? You could have sold this land, used the money to start over somewhere easier. Why here? Ethan thought about the question, trying to articulate something he barely understood himself. Because she chose it for me, my mother. She was dying and broke, and she used her last strength to buy this specific piece of land. Not just any land, this land. And I kept wondering why. Have you figured it out? I think so. He looked around the unfinished space. This land is hard, the winters are brutal, the work never ends. But it is also beautiful and honest, and it does not care who I was before. It only cares about what I do now. I think she knew I needed that, a place that would force me to prove myself. Julia was quiet for a moment, then spoke softly. My dad says you have good character, that you show up and do the work without excuses. Coming from him, that is high praise. Your dad barely talks to me. He talks about you plenty. To my mom, to the other ranchers. He respects you. Julia met his eyes. So do I. The moment stretched between them, significant and fragile. Ethan wanted to say something, to acknowledge what was building between them, but fear held him back. Fear of misreading signals. Fear of ruining the easy friendship they had developed. Fear of wanting something he might not be able to keep. Julia seemed to understand his hesitation. She stood gathering the empty containers. I should go. Early morning tomorrow. But at the door she paused. We are having a Valentine's Day dance at the community center. Nothing fancy, just the usual crowd. You should come. I do not dance. Neither do most of the men. That is not the point. She smiled. The point is showing up. After she left, Ethan sat alone in the firelight, thinking about showing up. It had become the central principle of his life. Show up for work at Ben's ranch. Show up to build every day. Show up even when exhausted or discouraged or convinced he was failing. And now maybe showing up meant something else. Meant accepting that he was becoming part of this community. That relationships were forming whether he felt ready for them or not. February brought down a thaw, temperatures climbing into the 40s during the day. Snow melted in great sheets, turning the property into a muddy mess, but also signaling that spring was coming. Ethan used the warmer weather to work on exterior projects he had been postponing. He began digging the trench for the septic system, back-breaking work that involved a pickaxe and shovel, and hours of labor to create a channel 3 feet deep. The soil was still partially frozen, making every foot of progress a victory. Julia stopped by one afternoon and found him shoulder-deep in the trench, mud-caked and exhausted. She stood at the edge looking down with an expression caught between amusement and concern. You know you can hire people to do this. Cannot afford it. How much would it cost? $2,000 probably. I do not have $2,000. Julia was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking. My dad needs help with spring calving. Starts next week. If you worked for him full-time for 6 weeks, he would pay you $5,000. Ethan climbed out of the trench. Why would he do that? Because you are good at the work, because he trusts you, and because he knows you are trying to build something real here. Julia paused, then added quietly, and because I asked him to. The admission carried weight. She was advocating for him, using her influence with her father to help him. That meant something. I would have to stop work on the house for 6 weeks. The house will still be here. Cows will not wait. She extended her hand to help him fully out of the muddy trench. Besides, you need to eat. You are getting too thin. He looked down at himself. She was right. 4 months of physical labor and rationed food had stripped away every ounce of fat. His jeans hung loose despite a belt. His face was all angles and shadows. Okay, tell your dad I will do it. Tell him yourself. You are coming to that dance tomorrow night, remember? The Valentine's Day dance was held in the community center, a utilitarian building that served as town hall, voting location, and social gathering space. When Ethan arrived, nervous in his cleanest shirt and jeans, he found perhaps 50 people already there. Ranching families, older couples, teenagers pretending not to care while clearly invested in the social dynamics. Julia found him standing awkwardly near the refreshment table. She wore a simple blue dress that made her eyes even brighter. You came. You told me to show up. I did. And you listened. That is a good quality in a man. They did not dance much. Ethan genuinely did not know how, and Julia seemed content to talk instead. But she introduced him to people, drew him into conversations, made sure he felt included in the community gathering. Later, stepping outside for air, they stood on the porch watching snow begin to fall again. Julia pulled her coat tighter against the cold. I need to tell you something. She said it carefully, looking out at the snow rather than at him. When my dad first asked me to check on you, I thought it was a waste of time. Another city kid who would fail at ranching and abandon the property. I was annoyed he was asking me to babysit someone who would be gone in a month. But you were not what I expected. You were actually working, actually building. And you did not act like the land owed you anything. You just showed up and did what needed doing. She turned to face him. I kept coming back because I wanted to see if you would quit. And when you did not, I kept coming back because I wanted to see what you would become. And what have I become? Someone worth knowing. Someone who keeps his promises. Someone who honors his mother's faith in him. Julia smiled. Someone I am glad I met. Ethan felt the warmth of her words settle into his chest, solid and real. I am glad you met me too, even if it started with you spying for your father. They both laughed, the tension breaking. Julia reached out and took his hand, her fingers cold from the night air but her grip firm. Inside, someone had put on music. Slow music. Julia pulled him toward the door. Come on, one dance. I will teach you. I'm going to step on your feet, then step on them. I have thick boots. The 6 weeks that followed the dance were among the hardest of Ethan's life. Calving season meant constant vigilance. Cows gave birth at all hours, often needing assistance. A calf born in the wrong position could die, taking the mother with it if help did not arrive quickly. Ethan learned to pull calves, to recognize signs of distress, to make quick decisions that meant the difference between life and death. He learned that ranching was not romantic. It was bloody hands and sleepless nights and the constant awareness that nature gave and took with equal indifference. But he also learned the satisfaction of saving a life, of pulling a calf that would have died and watching it stand on wobbly legs and nurse for the first time, of seeing a mother that had struggled accept her baby and begin the ancient process of bonding. Julia worked alongside them, her veterinary skills invaluable. She could diagnose problems Ethan and Ben would have missed, could perform interventions that saved animals that would have been lost. Watching her work, confident and capable and completely in her element, Ethan felt something beyond admiration, something that might have been love. They had fallen into an easy partnership, showing up at the same emergencies, working in tandem without needing words to coordinate. After particularly difficult births, they would sit in the barn drinking coffee, too wired to sleep, talking about everything and nothing. One night, after they had lost both a cow and her calf despite their best efforts, Julia sat beside Ethan in exhausted silence. Finally, she spoke. This never gets easier, losing them. Every time it happens, I wonder why I do this. Why do you? Because the ones we save matter. Because showing up and trying is better than not caring. She looked at him, her face streaked with dirt and blood and tears. You understand that. It is why you are building that house, not because it is easy, but because it matters. The 6 weeks ended in early April. Spring had arrived in earnest, the valley transforming into something green and alive. Ethan collected his final payment from Ben, $5,000 that felt like a fortune. You did good work. Ben said it simply, without elaboration. You have a standing offer here. Anytime you need money, I can find work for you. Thank you. Ben studied him for a long moment. My daughter likes you, in case you are too dense to notice. I noticed. Good. Do not screw it up. Ben walked away, conversation apparently concluded. That evening, Ethan returned to his property for the first time in weeks. The house stood exactly as he had left it, patient and waiting. But everything felt different. He felt different. 6 weeks of intensive ranching had changed him, had added layers of competence and confidence he had not possessed before. He had money now, real money, enough to hire the septic installation, to buy finished materials, to transform the bare-bones shelter into an actual home. But more than that, he had community. He had people who knew his name and valued his work. He had Julia, who saw him not as a project or a charity case, but as an equal. He had Frank's voice still in his head, even though the old man was in Arizona recovering from a bronchitis that had nearly killed him in February. Standing in the doorway of the house his mother had dreamed and he had built, Ethan understood what she had really given him. Not land, not shelter, but the opportunity to prove to himself that he could build a life from nothing, that he could be someone who mattered, who contributed, who belonged. The foundation she had poured was not just concrete, it was faith. Faith that he would find his way. Faith that hard work would reveal his character. Faith that this land and this community would accept him if he earned his place. And looking out over the valley in the spring twilight, Ethan knew with absolute certainty that her faith had not been misplaced. He had built a house, but more importantly, he had built himself. The work was far from over. The house still needed finishing, the land needed development, life needed living. But for the first time since his mother died, Ethan felt not just hope, but certainty. He was home. He belonged. And whatever came next, he would handle it. Because that is what builders do. They show up, they do the work, and they create something that lasts. Spring brought transformation to the valley so rapid it seemed impossible. One week the land was brown and dormant, sleeping under the last remnants of snow. The next, wildflowers exploded across the hillsides in waves of purple lupine and red paintbrush. The creek swelled with runoff, running fast and cold and full of promise. Ethan stood on the partially completed deck he had been building, watching dawn paint the eastern hills gold. 9 months. He had been on this land for 9 months. In that time, he had transformed a bare foundation into a weather-tight house, had learned skills he had not known existed, had become part of a community that had accepted him not because of who he was, but because of the work he had proven willing to do. The house was nearly finished now. The septic system was installed and functional, paid for with money from calving season. The interior walls were drywalled and painted. The kitchen had basic cabinets and a functioning sink. The bathroom worked. It was not fancy. The appliances were used, purchased from salvage yards and estate sales. The furniture was minimal, mostly pieces Bear Morrison had delivered from various sources. But it was complete, livable, home. Frank had not visited since Christmas. His health had deteriorated through the winter until even phone calls became difficult, his voice growing weaker, the wet rattle of his breathing audible even through the line. But he still asked detailed questions about the construction, offered advice on problems Ethan encountered, lived vicariously through the project he had helped begin. "You need to send me pictures," Frank had said during their last conversation in March, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want to see what we built." Ethan had sent photos the next day. Exterior shots showing the completed structure, interior shots of the finished rooms, the deck he had added, the garden plot he was preparing. Everything he thought Frank would want to see. When Frank called a week later, there were tears in his voice. "You did it. You actually did it. We did it. You taught me. No, you did the work. That is what matters." Frank paused, gathering breath. "I need to tell you something. There is a box in my storage unit. My daughter has the key. In it are letters your mother wrote me. Dozens of them. You should have them. Should know how much thought she put into this." "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I might not get another chance." Frank said it plainly, without self-pity. "Doctors are not optimistic, and I need you to know that teaching you was the greatest honor of my life. You became the son I never had." Ethan felt his throat tighten. "You were more of a father than anyone. You showed up when no one else did. Build a good life." Frank said it with urgency. "Not just a house, a life. Family, community, legacy. That is what your mother wanted. That is what I want for you. I will, I promise." "Good." Frank's breathing had become labored. "I need to rest now, but Ethan, one more thing. There are 6 more kids like you. Foster kids whose mothers were in a group with Sarah. They are going to inherit land too. Find them, help them build. That is how we honor your mother." The line went quiet except for Frank's breathing. They talked a bit more mundane things about weather and construction details, but the conversation felt like goodbye. Frank Donnelly died 3 days later. His daughter called with the news. Peaceful, she said. At home. He had your pictures on his bedside table. The funeral was in Billings. Ethan made the drive with Julia, both of them silent for most of the journey. The service was simple, military honors, people sharing stories about a man who had spent his life building and teaching and showing up. Ethan did not speak. He could not find words adequate to express what Frank had meant, how the old man had found him when he was lost, had taught him not just carpentry, but how to be a man who kept his promises, how to honor commitments even when they cost everything. Frank's daughter approached Ethan after the service. She handed him a key and an address. The storage unit. Dad wanted you to have the letters and his tools, all of them. The storage unit was in an industrial park on the edge of Billings. Inside was a lifetime of accumulated equipment, tools organized with military precision, old blueprints, construction manuals, and a box labeled Sarah in Frank's handwriting. Inside were 43 letters, some just a paragraph, others running pages. Sarah's thoughts and fears and plans laid out in careful handwriting. Ethan took the box back to Montana and spent a weekend reading every word. Together, they formed the narrative of his mother's final year, her determination to secure his future, her fears that he would think she had abandoned him, her love communicated through action and planning rather than presence. One letter stopped him cold, dated 3 weeks before her death. Frank found a good family to take Ethan. But I said no, I know he needs a family, but I also know the system. He will end up in group homes, bouncing between placements. And in some twisted way, maybe that is better. Maybe struggling will make him strong in ways comfortable would not. Maybe facing hard things young will teach him he can survive hard things. I pray I am not wrong. I pray my death does not break him. But I believe he has my stubbornness. I believe he will survive. More than survive. I believe he will build something beautiful. Ethan read the letter 3 times, trying to reconcile his mother's words with his childhood experience. She had chosen to let him go into the system rather than a single adoptive family, had made the calculated decision that struggle would strengthen him. It was brutal logic, almost cruel. But looking at who he had become, at the skills and character forged in group homes and foster care, he could not say she had been wrong. Another letter, written just days before her death, outlined the group life insurance policy she had organized with 6 other single mothers, each with a child in foster care, each terminal. They had pooled resources, bought land when they could, planned for futures they would not see. We are 7 mothers leaving 7 legacies, Sarah had written. Frank promised to find Ethan when he turned 21. I have asked him to find the others too, to teach them, to help them build. This is bigger than my son. This is about creating something that multiplies, about breaking the cycle of abandonment and poverty, about giving these kids what the system cannot, a foundation. Ethan sat with that letter for a long time, understanding finally the full scope of what his mother and Frank had planned. This was not just about him. 6 other kids would inherit land, 6 other young people aging out with nothing but a foundation and the hope that someone would care enough to teach them. Frank had asked him to find them, to help them, to pass on what he had learned. The responsibility felt enormous. Ethan was barely keeping his own operation running. How could he help build 6 more? But he thought about Frank driving 90 minutes before dawn to teach him, about Bear showing up with salvaged materials, about Ben giving him work when he needed it, about Rita feeding him, about Julia believing in him. Community had built him. Maybe he could build community for others. May brought work that filled every daylight hour. The garden needed constant attention, weeding and watering and training plants to grow properly. The partnership with Ben required fence repair and pasture improvement, preparing for cattle that would arrive in June. And there was still finish work on the house, small projects that transformed functional into comfortable. Julia was there most evenings now, the relationship deepening from casual to serious to something that felt permanent. They did not talk explicitly about marriage, but it hovered in the air between them, an understanding rather than a question. One evening, working side by side transplanting tomato seedlings, Julia spoke without looking up from her work. I want you to know something. I could have had easier, dated guys with money, with established careers. My mom worried I was settling, choosing a man with nothing but potential. And what did you tell her? That I was not choosing what he had. I was choosing who he was. Julia sat back on her heels, meeting his eyes. You show up every day. No excuses, no complaints, just work. That is rarer than you think. I do not know any other way. I know. That is why I chose you. The garden progressed through May into June, plants growing with almost visible speed. Ethan had never grown anything before, had never been responsible for nurturing life. The experience was humbling and exhilarating. He could see the direct result of his efforts, could watch seeds he had planted transform into living, producing plants. Rita stopped by weekly to check progress, offering advice and critique in equal measure. She was not someone who gave unearned praise, so when she said the garden looked good, Ethan knew she meant it. You are a natural. She said it examining his tomato plants, checking for disease or pests. Most first-time gardeners either overcare or undercare. You have found the balance. Julia taught me. Julia has good instincts, but you are the one doing the work. Give yourself credit. The first harvest came in early July. Lettuce, radishes, early peas. Ethan loaded his truck with produce and drove to the Big Timber Farmers Market with no idea what to expect. He set up a simple table with hand-painted signs Julia had made and waited. The market was busy, locals and tourists browsing tables of vegetables, baked goods, crafts. Ethan watched other vendors, trying to understand the rhythm, the interaction between seller and buyer. An old woman stopped at his table, examining the lettuce with a critical eye. This organic? No pesticides, no chemical fertilizer, just good soil and water. She bought 2 heads of lettuce and a bunch of radishes, paying cash. That sale, simple and straightforward, felt like validation. He had grown food. Someone wanted it enough to pay for it. The transaction was honest and direct. By noon, he had sold half his produce. By 2, when the market closed, he had made $87. Not a fortune, but money earned from his own land, his own labor, his own planning. Julia met him at the truck as he was packing up. How did you do? $87. That is good for a first market. Wait until tomato season. That is when the real money comes. They drove back to the property together, Julia's truck following his. The summer evening was perfect. Warm but not hot. The valley painted in shades of green and gold. When they arrived, Bear Morrison's truck was parked in front of the house. The old Marine was sitting on the deck, drinking from a thermos. He stood when they approached, his expression serious. Heard about Frank. Wanted to come by and check on you. I am all right. No, you are not, but you will be. Bear gestured to the house. He would be proud of this, of you. You honored his teaching. I tried. You did more than try. You succeeded. Bear pulled an envelope from his jacket. Frank asked me to give you this, said to wait a month after he passed. It has been a month. Ethan took the envelope, recognizing Frank's handwriting on the outside. He opened it carefully, unfolding a single sheet of paper. The letter was brief but clear. Frank explained the group life insurance policy in detail. Named the 6 other mothers, their kids, the locations of the properties. 2 kids had already inherited and sold immediately. 4 more would receive land when their mothers died. Frank wanted Ethan to find them, teach them, help them build. This is how we honor your mother, Frank had written. Not by building one house, but by creating a network. By multiplying what she started. You have the skills now. You have the knowledge. Pass it on. That is legacy. Ethan handed the letter to Julia. She read it in silence, then looked up with tears in her eyes. He wants you to do for others what he did for you. 6 kids, 6 properties. The scale of what Frank was asking seemed impossible. But as he looked at the house he had built, at the garden producing food, at the life he had carved from raw land and determination, he realized Frank was right. You do not have to do this alone. Julia said it quietly, reading his thoughts. We can do it together. My dad would help. Bear would help. That is what community means. Over the next weeks, Ethan researched what Frank had set up. He contacted social workers, tracked down kids who had aged out, found Marcus Webb first, 19, recently out of foster care in Bozeman, living in a shelter and working at a fast food restaurant. Marcus had inherited 160 acres 40 miles from Ethan's property. He had been trying to sell but had found no buyers. The land was too raw, too far from anything. Ethan drove to Bozeman and found Marcus skeptical, defensive, clearly expecting another scam. They talked for an hour in a McDonald's booth. Ethan explained about his mother, about Frank, about the foundation he had poured in the house he had built. I can teach you. If you want to learn, why would you do that? Because someone did it for me. Because your mother bought that land for a reason. Because selling it is easy and building on it is hard. But hard is what makes it worth doing. Marcus did not believe him. Not yet. But he was desperate enough to agree to at least look at the land. The next weekend, Ethan and Julia drove Marcus to his property. Standing there looking at 160 acres of possibility, Marcus asked the question Ethan had once asked Frank. What am I supposed to do with this? Build. Start with shelter. I will teach you. Others will help. But you have to want it. Marcus stood in silence, clearly overwhelmed. Nobody has ever given me nothing without wanting something back. I am not giving you anything. This is already yours. I am just showing you how to use it. That moment, watching Marcus process the idea that he owned something permanent, Ethan understood what Frank had felt, what his mother had hoped for. This was legacy, not just building structures, but building people, showing them they were capable of more than they believed. As summer deepened into August, Ethan found himself running two operations. His own property, now producing vegetables that sold well at market, and Marcus's build, teaching the younger man how to pour a foundation, frame walls, think long-term. It was exhausting, but it was also purposeful in a way nothing else had been. Every time Marcus learned a new skill, every time he completed a task he had thought impossible, Ethan saw his own journey reflected, saw what Frank had given him, saw what his mother had hoped for. Julia worked alongside them, her veterinary practice now part-time so she could focus on helping. Ben contributed materials and occasional labor. Bear showed up unannounced with salvaged supplies and gruff encouragement. The community that had built Ethan was now building Marcus. And in the process, it was building itself, creating networks of support and knowledge that would outlast any individual. Standing on Marcus's newly poured foundation one evening in late August, Ethan felt the pieces of his life clicking into place. He had a home. He had work that mattered. He had Julia and the promise of family. He had purpose beyond survival. His mother had bought a land. Frank had taught him to build on it. And now he was teaching others. The cycle continued, each generation lifting the next, creating something that would outlast them all. That was legacy, not money or property, but knowledge and opportunity passed from hand to hand, from heart to heart. His mother had understood that. Frank had understood it. And now, finally, Ethan understood it too. The work would never be finished. There would always be another kid aging out, another piece of land needing development, another foundation waiting to be poured. But that was the point. Legacy was not a destination, it was a direction, a commitment to building not just for yourself, but for those who would come after. And standing there in the golden light of late summer, watching Marcus measure and mark exactly as Frank had taught and Ethan had learned, he knew with absolute certainty that this was what his mother had meant. Not just a house, a future, not just for one, but for many. That was the real foundation. And it would stand long after they were all gone. 2 years passed like water flowing over stone, slowly reshaping everything it touched. Ethan Cole, 24 years old, stood in the doorway of his house, watching the sun rise over the valley. His daughter Sarah, asleep in the nursery behind him, and felt the weight of everything that had changed. The scared 21-year-old, who had arrived with nothing but 2 bags and a foundation, was gone. In his place stood a man with calloused hands and sun-weathered skin, a husband, a father, a landowner, a teacher, someone who had built not just a structure, but a life. The house had grown beyond the original blueprints. An addition now held 2 more bedrooms, built with help from Marcus and Tyler and James, the first 3 kids he had helped. The deck wrapped around 2 sides, offering views of the valley and the creek and the garden that now sprawled across 2 acres. Julia emerged from the bedroom carrying baby Frank, their son, 4 months old and already showing signs of his mother's temperament. Practical, observant, patient. He is hungry again, always is. Ethan took his son, feeling the solid weight of him, the absolute trust in how the baby relaxed into his arms. Fatherhood still terrified him sometimes. The responsibility of shaping a life, of being present in ways his own father had not been, of breaking cycles of abandonment that stretched back generations. But Julia had been right when she told him he would learn. Just as he had learned to build, he was learning to parent. Not perfectly, but showing up, being there, that was what mattered. The partnership with Ben had formalized into a proper ranching operation, 200 head of cattle across both property, Shared costs, shared profits, shared work. It was not glamorous. Ranching never was. But it provided stable income and connected Ethan to land and community in ways that felt permanent. The garden had become a significant operation too. 3 farmers markets a week during summer. A small CSA program with 20 families buying shares. Enough vegetable production to support them comfortably and provide employment for one of the foster kids during harvest season. But the real transformation was in the work with what they now called the Sarah Cole Foundation. What had started with Marcus had grown into something larger than Ethan had imagined possible. In 2 years, they had located and helped 4 more kids, each one with land inherited from mothers who had died young, each one lost and scared and certain they would fail, each one learning slowly that they could build something from nothing if someone cared enough to teach them. Marcus Webb had finished his house 18 months ago, small but solid, weather-tight. He lived there now, working as an electrician's apprentice while helping with the newest kids. The angry defensive teenager had been replaced by a young man who understood the value of showing up, of keeping promises, of passing on what you had learned. Kayla Mitchell, 22 now, had built a horse rescue operation on her 180 acres near Missoula. 3 barns, 8 paddocks, 12 rescue horses in various stages of rehabilitation. She was training to become a farrier, learning from an old horseman who recognized in her the same stubbornness that had allowed Ethan to succeed. Tyler Chen had walls up on his house, but no roof yet. Progress was slower for him. He worked construction full-time in Great Falls to earn money for materials. But he showed up every weekend, put in the work, asked for help when he needed it. The transformation was visible, not just in the structure rising from his foundation, but in Tyler himself. He stood straighter now, met eyes when speaking, carried himself like someone who belonged. James Whitehorse had the most ambitious plan. Bison on reservation land near Lame Deer. The regulatory challenges were significant, the cultural implications complex, but Ben had connections in the tribal council and was helping navigate the bureaucracy. James's first 5 bison would arrive in the spring. A small start, but a start nonetheless. 2 more kids had been found recently. Emma Rodriguez near Havre, planning an organic farm operation. And David Kim, the youngest at 18, still uncertain what he wanted to build but willing to try. The foundation had developed systems, documentation, a network of volunteers who understood the mission. Bear Morrison served as chief construction advisor, his gruff expertise available to any kid willing to listen. Ben provided ranching knowledge and occasional employment. Rita taught gardening and food preservation. Pastor Jim Walsh connected them with church networks across Montana. What had started as one man honoring a promise had become a community effort, and the community was better for it. That was the part that still surprised Ethan. The foundation did not just help the kids. It helped everyone involved, gave them purpose, connected them to something larger than individual survival. One evening in September, exactly 2 years after Frank's death, Ethan sat in his workshop surrounded by the tools Frank had left him. He had been thinking about the old man more than usual, missing his gruff wisdom, his patient teaching, his absolute faith that Ethan could do hard things. Julia found him there, baby Sarah on her hip. "You are thinking about him, always, especially when I am teaching Marcus or Tyler. I hear Frank's voice, measure twice, cut once. Close enough is not good enough. He would be proud of what you have built, not just this house, all of it." "I hope so. I know so." Julia sat beside him, shifting Sarah to her other hip. "We need to talk about something. I'm pregnant again." The words settled into the quiet workshop, huge and wonderful and terrifying. "Again?" 3 months along. "I wanted to be sure before I told you." Ethan pulled her close, careful of the baby between them, feeling the enormity of 3 lives depending on him. "How do you feel?" "Scared, excited, exhausted already." She laughed. "Normal." Over the next months, as Julia's pregnancy progressed and winter set in, Ethan found himself reflecting on the concept of legacy more than ever. What would he leave his children? Land, yes, the house, the ranch operation. But more than that, he wanted to leave them understanding. That hard work mattered, that showing up was everything, that community was built through contribution, not entitlement. The foundation's work continued through winter. Marcus had officially joined the board, taking on responsibility for helping the newest kids. Tyler, despite his house being unfinished, was mentoring David. The multiplication of knowledge Frank had envisioned was happening organically, each person who learned becoming a teacher. One Saturday in January, all 6 kids and their various support people gathered at Ethan's house for a foundation meeting. It was cramped, 15 people in a living room designed for family gatherings, but the energy was good, productive. They talked about the challenges each build faced. Tyler needed roofing help. David was struggling with the isolation of his remote property. Emma wanted to start her CSA program, but did not know how to structure it. Kayla needed advice on applying for agricultural grants. The meeting lasted 3 hours, solutions emerging from collective knowledge. Ben knew about grant applications. Rita had CSA experience. Bear could help with roofing. Marcus would visit David weekly to combat the isolation. Problems that would have defeated individuals were manageable for a network. That was the power of what they were building, not just houses, but community. Not just solving individual challenges, but creating systems that worked for everyone. After the meeting, as people were leaving, Marcus pulled Ethan aside. "I want to say something. When you found me in that shelter, I thought you were running some kind of scam. Nobody helps for free. You were not wrong to be suspicious, but you kept showing up, week after week, teaching me, not judging, just working alongside me until I understood." Marcus paused, emotion making his voice thick. "You gave me more than a house. You gave me proof that I could do hard things, that I was worth the effort. You did the work. I just showed you how. No, you believed in me before I believed in myself. That is what made the difference." Marcus met his eyes. "I am going to do the same for others, for as many kids as I can reach. That is how I thank you." After everyone left, Ethan stood alone in the sudden quiet of his house. Julie had taken the kids to her parents for the afternoon. The space felt large and empty and full of possibility. He walked to the spot where the original foundation began, now hidden beneath floors and walls, but still there, still solid. His mother had knelt on this ground, sick and scared and determined, mixing concrete and dreaming of a future she would never see. She had not known what he would build, could not have imagined the house that now stood here, or the foundation that bore her name, or the network of kids building their own futures on land purchased by dying mothers. But she had known something more important, that love was not measured in presence but in preparation, that the best gift a parent could give was not comfort but foundation, not ease but opportunity. Spring brought new life in multiple forms. Julia gave birth to their second son in April, another healthy baby they named Thomas, after Bear Morrison, who cried openly when he heard and then denied it completely. Emma Rodriguez broke ground on her first greenhouse, planning to start seedlings for her CSA program. David Kim had walls up finally after a winter of struggle. James Whitehorse's bison arrived, 5 massive animals that represented both his heritage and his future. And Marcus Webb, working with a lawyer Ben recommended, had officially formalized his role with the Sarah Cole Foundation. He was no longer just a beneficiary but a leader, someone who would help find and teach the next generation of foster kids inheriting land. The multiplication continued. Each success created a template. Each person helped became a helper. The foundation had gone from Ethan teaching Marcus to a network of 20 people actively involved, with dozens more providing support, materials, knowledge. One evening in May, with both boys sleeping and Julia reading, Ethan found himself at his desk with the box of his mother's letters. He had not read them in months, almost afraid of what new revelations they might contain. But tonight he pulled out the final letter, the one she had written days before dying, the one that had explained the group insurance policy and the 7 mothers who had bought land for their children. At the bottom, in handwriting that shook with weakness, she had added a postscript he had not noticed before. "If you are reading this, you have built something. I do not know what. A house, perhaps, maybe more. But I know you built it because you have my stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Now I need you to understand something. This was never just about you. This land, this plan, this foundation. It was always meant to multiply, to create something bigger than one mother's love for one son. It was meant to start a movement, to prove that kids like you can build futures from nothing if someone cares enough to show them how. Do not stop with your own success. Build for others, teach others, create legacy that outlasts us all. That is what love does. It multiplies, always." Mom. Ethan sat with those words for a long time, understanding finally the full scope of what she had envisioned. 7 mothers, 7 kids. But not ending there, multiplying outward, each one helped becoming someone who helped others, creating waves that would spread farther than any individual could reach. That summer, the foundation helped its 10th kid. A girl named Sophie Tran, 17 about to age out, who had inherited 60 acres near Kalispell. She wanted to build a pottery studio to create art and sell it and make a living from beauty. It was the most unconventional plan yet, but the foundation had learned that dreams came in different forms. Cattle ranches and horse rescues and organic farms and now pottery. Each one valid, each one worth supporting. The community showed up for Sophie the same way they had shown up for Ethan 3 years earlier. Teaching, supporting, believing she could do what seemed impossible. And she could, because that was what the foundation had proven over and over. That young people with nothing but land and determination could build futures if someone cared enough to teach them. That legacy multiplied when you passed on what you had learned. That love demonstrated through action was stronger than any obstacle. 2 years after Sarah's birth, the Carver and Cole families gathered for a celebration. Ben and Rita's 40th wedding anniversary, a party that filled their ranch house with 3 generations, neighbors, friends, the entire network of people who had built each other up. Ethan stood apart for a moment, watching Julia with their 2 boys, watching Marcus laughing with Tyler and James, watching Bear teaching a group of kids how to properly hold tools, watching it all and feeling the weight of gratitude. His mother had bought land. Frank had taught him to build on it. Julia had believed in him. Ben had given him work. Rita had fed him. Bear had shared his knowledge. Pastor Jim had connected him to community. And now he was doing the same for others. The cycle continued, each generation lifting the next, creating something that would outlast them all. Ben approached with 2 beers, handing one to Ethan. You look thoughtful. Just grateful. For what? All of it. This, Ethan gestured at the gathering. People who showed up, who taught me, who believed I was worth the effort. You earned it. Ben took a drink. But I will tell you something. When you first showed up, I did not think you would last a month. City kid with soft hands and big dreams. I have seen hundreds like you fail. What changed your mind? You did not quit when it got hard. Did not make excuses. Did not expect anyone to make it easier. You just showed up every day and did the work. Ben looked at him directly. That is rare. That is character. And character is what builds things that last. Later, as the party wound down and families began to leave, Pastor Jim asked for everyone's attention. He stood on the porch looking out over the gathered community. We are here to celebrate Ben and Rita's 40 years together. 40 years of partnership and hard work and building a life and a family and a legacy. He paused, his eyes finding Ethan. But I want to also acknowledge something else. 3 years ago, a young man showed up in our community with nothing but land and determination. We did not know if he would make it. Most did not think he would. But he proved us wrong, not just by building a house, by building a foundation that has helped 10 young people do the same, by creating a network that turns individual struggle into collective strength, by showing us all what it means to multiply love through action. The crowd was silent, many wiping eyes. Jim continued. Ethan Cole built him a foundation his mother poured, but he did not stop there. He became a foundation for others, and that is what community means. Not taking from each other, but building each other up. Not competing, but collaborating. Not hoarding success, but multiplying it. That night, driving home with Julia and the boys, Ethan felt something he had never quite experienced before. Peace, not the absence of challenge or work or struggle, but the deep peace that comes from knowing you are living the life you were meant to live, that you are honoring the sacrifices made for you, that you are passing on what you received. Standing in the doorway of his house later, after Julia and the boys were asleep, Ethan looked out over the valley. The same view he had seen 3 years ago when this was just a foundation and a dream. But everything was different now. Lights glowed in Marcus's house, visible in the distance. Tyler's property was too far to see, but Ethan knew lights burned there too. And scattered across Montana in 10 different locations, lights shone in houses built by foster kids who had been told they would fail. His mother had started this with one foundation. Frank had multiplied it by teaching Ethan, and now it was multiplying again through every kid who learned and then taught others. That was legacy, not what you built for yourself, but what you built that allowed others to build. Not the destination, but the direction. Not the end, but the beginning that never stopped beginning. Ethan thought about his sons, sleeping peacefully in bedrooms he had built with his own hands. What would he teach them? The same things Frank had taught him. That hard work mattered, that showing up was everything, that you measured twice and cut once, that close enough was not good enough, that character was built through doing hard things, but also something more, that success meant nothing if it was not shared, that strength came from community, not isolation, that the best way to honor those who helped you was to help others, that love multiplied when you gave it away. Those lessons were encoded in this house, in the foundation his mother had poured, in the network of kids building their own futures. His sons would grow up knowing they came from a line of builders, not just of structures, but of lives, of community, of legacy. The work would never be finished. There would always be another kid aging out, another foundation to pour, another life to help build. But that was not a burden. That was purpose. That was meaning. That was what it meant to break ground. Not just to dig into earth, but to break through limitation, through fear, through the belief that one person could not make a difference. His mother had made a difference with one foundation. Frank had multiplied it, and now Ethan was multiplying it again. The foundation, invisible beneath his feet but solid as stone, would hold for generations yet to come. His sons would build on it. The kids he taught would build on it. Their children would build on it. And somewhere in whatever came after death, his mother was watching, seeing what her faith had created, seeing the love she had poured into concrete multiplied 100-fold through lives built and futures claimed and legacy that would never end. Ethan walked back into the house, to his family, to the life he had built on the foundation he was given. Behind him, the valley settled into darkness. Ahead, tomorrow waited with its work and challenges and opportunities. But tonight, standing in the doorway between past and future, Ethan Cole knew with absolute certainty what his mother had known when she poured that foundation. Love demonstrated through action was eternal. It multiplied through every hand it touched, every heart it changed, every life it built. It became not just memory, but living legacy, growing and spreading and creating foundations that would hold forever. That was what she had built, not concrete and land and legal documents, but faith made manifest, hope turned into action, love that would outlast them all, last. And the foundation stood, solid, permanent, unshakable, ready to hold whatever came next.